And here we go. The first thing to know about Cuba is that tourist visas are still restricted here from the United States. So if you carry a United States passport, there are 12 different categories of authorized travel to Cuba. Things like family visits, official business for the U.S. government, professional research, journalism. The one that is going to be the most common for tourists is support for the Cuban people. The reason this gets tricky is that if you're traveling on a support for the Cuban people visa, you need to prove that you're supporting the Cuban people for at least a certain number of hours per day. And this is where your travel agent is going to come in really handy. As you'll see from our itinerary, each one of our activities was in support of the Cuban people. We used Alyssa Cohen from Lux Traveler Club, who does a great job for us in all of our travels. And she arranged our itinerary so that we were supporting the Cuban people for enough time to qualify for the visa. Our first stop was Revolution Square, where Fidel Castro famously held many political rallies, some of which included an audience of more than 1 million people. This is one of the most famous photographs taken from this time period from this Revolution Square. You may recognize this photograph, and the photographer who took it was Raul Corrales, who was Fidel Castro's official photographer at the time. After we visited Revolution Square, we had the opportunity to visit Raul Corrales' granddaughter's gallery, which contains many of the famous photographs that Raul Corrales took during this time, including the famous one you saw before. Claudia Corrales runs the gallery now, and the gallery itself includes original photographs of Ernest Hemingway, who you see right there holding the gun, Che Guevara, and of course, Fidel Castro. Claudia Corrales is an esteemed photographer in her own right. She takes both artistic images and classic Cuban images. Several of her photographs are displayed in hotels all around the city. Next, we headed over to an art gallery that the children enjoyed quite a bit, and this was Fusterlandia, the immersive art space of Jose Fuster, who was a famous Cuban artist. This place was wild. It was like being inside Dr. Seuss's head. Jose Fuster is an artist that draws inspiration from Picasso and Gaudi and puts it into this 3D art form that surrounds you when you come to the gallery. Initially, he decorated his home this way, and when his neighbors learned about it, they asked him to decorate different parts of the exterior of their homes as well. So this entire neighborhood looks like one big art gallery. Really, really neat experience for the kids. The gallery also includes a shop where you can purchase art, and we bought a couple of these whimsical pieces for our home. Next, we headed over to Habana Compass Dance, a fusion Afro-Caribbean percussion flamenco Cuban dance company that has performed all over the world. Check this out. These ladies performed with such heart and joy. It was an absolute pleasure to watch them. Believe it or not, we did all of that before lunch. For lunch, we stopped at a local Cuban restaurant called Frente. As expected, the food was delicious. All of our restaurants were pre-selected by our travel agent, specifically to make sure that the restaurants we were dining at were owned by the Cuban people, and therefore even our meals were in support of the Cuban people, which supported our visa. After lunch, a classic Cuban activity, salsa lessons. And after a jam-packed day one, we finally headed to our hotel, the Grand Hotel Manzana. The Grand Hotel Manzana is centrally located. It's right in the middle of Old Havana, right across the street from Park Central, and close to lots of restaurants, Hemingway's Floridita Bar, and the Capitol Building. For dinner, we went to one of Old Havana's more famous paladars, or restaurants in homes, that's run by one of Cuba's celebrity chefs. The food was delicious, the space was absolutely charming. It's located in this old colonial home. Great mojitos and a surprise, delightful live music performance at the end. One of the benefits of staying in such a central location is that we could walk right outside our hotel to the gorgeous square outside and stroll around, check out the night markets, live music everywhere we went. Such a fun, vibrant atmosphere. We ended the night with one last mojito and some daiquiris on the rooftop of our hotel, which actually has one of the best views in town. Day 2 started out with an activity I never would have thought to choose, but actually ended up being so much fun: a classic car photo shoot. This photographer came around town with us while we rode around in these classic cars and took photos at some of Cuba's iconic sites. A couple of weeks later, we got the photos, and they were incredible. Today is our walking tour of Old Havana. We are visiting 3 of the most famous squares in Old Havana. Throughout our walking tour of Old Havana, our very knowledgeable guide shared quite a bit about Cuban history, and being in the space where the history took place was a really interesting experience.
On to the second square. With the van.
This is Hotel Ambos Mundos, where Ernest Hemingway lived for 7 years. He stayed always in room 511, which is in the top corner, and today the hotel keeps that room as a permanent museum to the famous writer. Next up, the original birthplace of the mojito. This little bar located in an alley in Old Havana has live music, still serves excellent mojitos, and is always crowded because it is the original birthplace of the mojito. Next up on the list of activities I never would have thought to select, but actually ended up being wonderful and interesting, was lunch with a Cuban history professor. We had the opportunity to dine with this professor of Cuban history who previously served as a diplomat in the United States and had so much interesting perspective on Cuban-American relations, the history of Cuba, and Cuba's place in the world. This turned out to be one of our favorite experiences. And no trip abroad is complete without a visit to one of the local markets. This one is the Almacenes San Jose Artisans Market. Like all tourist marketplaces, this one is a little bit overpriced, but that's okay because it is in support of the Cuban people. Our last stop before finishing our whirlwind 36 hours in Cuba was La Floridita, the bar made famous by Ernest Hemingway and the home of the daiquiri. This is a very popular tourist attraction and it's always crowded, but I assure you the daiquiris they serve here are different and much better than the frozen daiquiris that you get in the United States. Just rum, lime, and sugar. All in all, we had a fantastic 36 hours in Cuba with a lot of unexpectedly delightful activities. Our itinerary was curated by Alyssa Cohen from Lux Traveler Club, whose information I will include below, in conjunction with the on-the-ground team at Cultural Cuba. We loved our trip and would highly recommend this for a quick weekend getaway from the US.